Hawaii is an incredible place to own a property, but your tenants may not always hold up to their end of the bargain. If you're facing a potential eviction for a tenant, then following the correct legal process is a must. Otherwise, you could face penalties and fees. But we've made this video to provide an overview of the legally appropriate methods for evicting a tenant in this state. It should give you a good overview of what the process looks like, but it is necessary for you to contact an attorney if you're dealing with a situation just like this. So with all that being said, let's get started. Here's everything you need to know about Hawaii eviction laws. If you've reached the point where you believe you have to evict a Hawaii tenant, the first step is to make sure you have a legally valid reason for doing so. And there are a few that the state does recognize. First, a landlord can evict a tenant in Hawaii for not paying their rent on time. In this state, rent's considered late the day after it's due, but your lease may have a longer grace period built in, so be sure to check before processing. Before beginning the official eviction process, a landlord must give the tenant a 5-day notice to quit. This document tells the tenant they have 5 days to either pay the owed amount or vacate the property. If the tenant still hasn't vacated the unit or paid their rent at the end of the period, you can begin the official eviction process with the courts. You can also evict a tenant in Hawaii for violating their lease agreement. This can include things like causing property damage, smoking in non-smoking areas, housing a pet in a pet-free unit, and similar lease violations. For this eviction justification, you have to provide a 10-day notice to comply, which gives the tenant 10 days to either fix the problem or leave the property. However, for serious violations of the lease relating to property damage or health and safety, the landlord doesn't have to give the tenant any time to fix the problem. They can issue a notice to vacate right away and begin the eviction proceedings immediately. A third justification for evicting a tenant is if they've engaged in illegal activity on the property. The proper way to proceed here varies based on whether the illegal activity is considered a common nuisance or something more severe. If there's a common nuisance problem, Hawaii landlords must give the tenant 24 hours to fix the issue. If the tenant doesn't comply, a 5-day notice to quit can be issued. If the tenant is still on that property at the end of that period, official eviction proceedings can begin. However, if the illegal activity on the property threatens or harms other tenants, the landlord doesn't have to give the perpetrator any time to fix the issue. In cases where the actions of the tenant aren't a common nuisance and don't threaten or harm other tenants, a 10-day notice to comply must be issued. It can be quite challenging to figure out which notice you need to give based on the legal issue at hand. So if you're having any trouble making that decision, contacting an attorney is your best bet. A fourth justification for evicting a tenant in Hawaii is that the rental unit is going to be demolished or converted into short-term rentals or condos. In any of these situations, a 120-day notice is required before the landlord can file for an eviction lawsuit. And finally, Hawaii landlords are also free to decide not to renew the tenant's lease when it expires. If the tenant remains inside their unit after their lease ends, they're considered a holdover tenant. In this case, you have to issue a notice to these tenants that you don't plan on renewing their lease. This may mean issuing a 10 or 45-day notice to quit, but it varies based on your jurisdiction and the type of lease that you had previously with your tenant. All right, I know that was a lot, but that wraps up the reasons a Hawaii landlord can evict a tenant in a legally valid way. Now let's look at the eviction process as a whole. Here's a step-by-step overview of how it goes. First, you have to provide proper notice to the tenant. The specific kind of notice that you need to provide varies based on the problem you're experiencing and other factors. If the tenant doesn't respond to your notice or fix the issue that you specified, you can begin the official eviction process by filing a complaint. This is a legal document that lays out your eviction case against the tenant and requests a remedy. Filing fees for complaints in Hawaii are $155 as of the making of this video. You have to submit the documents to the district court that oversees the rental property's jurisdiction as well. Once you file the complaint, you have to let the tenant know about the pending legal case against them. This is called service of process. And in Hawaii, there are 3 ways to do it. The first option is to deliver the summons and supporting documents to the tenant personally. If the tenant isn't available, you can leave the required documents with someone who lives with the tenant. And if that doesn't work, then you can post a copy of the documents in a secure and visible position by the entrance of the tenant's property. One thing to note here is that Hawaii laws allow for individuals over the age of 18 who aren't involved in the case to serve the process. But this does mean you can't do it yourself or have your attorney do it. Once you've served your tenant, the next step will be your initial court date, where you will ask for possession of the unit by filing a motion to obtain judgment. There are two things that can happen at this point. The first is that the tenant doesn't show up to the court date or fails to make a counter argument against your claims. If one of those things happen, you'll win the eviction case by default. The second outcome is that the tenant may try to argue against the case. In this instance, you're going to need to prove that your legal allegations are correct and that the tenant should be evicted from the property. If you need to prove your case, then having the right evidence with you is essential, although this does depend on the reasons for your eviction proceedings. For example, you may want to bring documents like copies of the lease agreement, rent receipts, bank statements, witness statements, and photo and video documentation. This will help you build a strong case and leave no doubt as to the justifications of your eviction. Whether the tenant argues against the eviction or not, you should eventually win the case as long as you have a legally valid reason for the eviction and the documentation to prove it. Once you've won, you'll receive a writ of possession from the court within the next few days. Now remember, this isn't issued automatically, so you will need to request it from the court judge. The writ of possession tells the tenant that they need to leave the property. If any belongings are left at that point, landlords are advised to contact the tenant and give them a 15-day notice to claim their belongings. If the tenant still won't leave the unit voluntarily, it's really important that you don't take matters into your own hands. The sheriff is the only person who can forcibly remove the tenant from the unit. If you do it yourself or shut off the tenant's utilities in retaliation, you could face fines and penalties, even if you have a valid eviction case. So there you have it. The entire eviction process in Hawaii can take between 4 to 8 weeks to complete. But you can avoid delays by making sure you keep good evidence. And it just so happens that DoorLoop can help you with that. It's our property management software that makes it easier to manage, organize, and store tenant data. And if you want to check it out, you can go to doorloop.com and sign up for a free demo. But whatever you decide to do, we hope you found this video helpful. Don't forget to like and subscribe to see more videos just like this. We'll see you soon. Until next time.